Welcome back to Class Act Updates in Education Law. I'm Miriam.
I'm Lisa.
We are attorneys at Walter Haverfield in Cleveland, Ohio. Every so often we get together and we talk about education law. We talk about the latest legal developments that are relevant to school boards, administrators, teachers, anybody who works with kids in the schools.
And today we are going to continue our discussion about Title IX and how that impacts school districts as well as universities. We previously focused on the discrimination key to that in looking at harassment, sexual violence, sexual assault, and some of the controversial things going on in the trajectory of those laws. And today we're going to switch gears to talk about in more depth sports and what that looks like with Title IX. And we also have our colleague Ben joining us again today. Welcome back, Ben.
Thanks for coming back.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Ben, out of all of the issues that we talked about last time, sexual harassment and violence, like Lisa mentioned, I think we also touched upon transgender. We'll talk more about that next time. Those are all relatively recent developments. I feel like the initial controversy over Title IX was focused on school sports and athletics, especially at the university level. Is that what you recall?
Yeah, that's generally correct. I mean, so sports was one of the first areas that was caused controversy. Even the general, if the general population was prepared in the 70s for equal treatment in academics, in the environment of athletics, so outside of the classroom and on the sport pitch, whatever you might call it, the United States and schools were not prepared to provide equal opportunity yet. So really
that became controversial almost right away, I would say.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So in 1973, Congress formally included athletics under Title IX.
Because previously it didn't mention athletics specifically at all, right?
The statute does not say anything about sports.
No. So big picture, you've got. Let's go back to the statute that was passed in 1972. That statute says, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Now, the key words there are education program or activity.
Okay.
So when Title IX was passed and shortly thereafter, much with any federal law, you've got corresponding federal regulations that are likely going to be implemented. And one of the instructions when Title IX was passed was there needed to be regulations dealing with athletics.
Okay.
So the code of regulations that inform and supplement the statute that is short, like we've read,
right,
governs all of the different aspects of Title IX. One of the major ones is there's a provision that speaks to athletics. There's other ones that speak to what is an educational activity, that talks about extracurricular activities, occupational activities, things like that a school is providing. But there are specific provisions that speak to athletics.
And so in other words, sports is considered part of the educational benefit that a school district or a university provides.
Correct.
And is it correct to say that Title IX, the athletic provisions that we're going to talk about today, that applies not only to colleges and universities, but also to K-12 districts?
It does.
Yes.
Okay.
That is 100% correct.
Okay.
And so when you were talking about Congress formally including athletics, since then it's gone as far as to outline some ways to demonstrate compliance, correct?
Yes. So to put a finer point on it, Congress instructed the Department of Education in 72 to articulate regulations that would govern athletics.
Okay.
And so you have a regulation governing athletics, and through that regulation, the Office of Civil Rights has articulated tests to assist in determining whether you're adhering to the dictates of Title IX as it relates to athletics.
So in 2019, what does a school or university have to do in order to comply with Title IX requirements as it relates to sports, to equality in sports? Do the programs actually have to be equal? Every school district has to have the exact same athletic program for women as it does for men?
So there's a practical problem you have to consider, and that's that we don't have 50-50 populations. There's not 100 men, 100 women, or
okay.
that's not how it works. the interpretations of Title IX are designed to account for the fact that there's different enrollments, different interest in population of the student body, and those guidelines are the kind of the markers that you can use to figure out as an institution whether you're complying with Title IX. So in 1979, there was a provision that articulated 3 tests that an institution could follow and meet and satisfy in order to ensure that their athletic activities were complying with the requirements of Title IX.
So a school district or university has to meet one of these tests?
Correct.
Is that right? Okay.
So the test, basically, it's a 3-part test to determine whether an institution is providing non-discriminatory athletic participation opportunities. So your first option is does your intercollegiate level participation opportunities for male and female students, are they provided in numbers substantially proportionate to the respective enrollment of the institution? So that's the first test. You're looking at a substantial proportional analysis. So
if you have 50 females and 100 males, you're kind of looking at a 1-to-2 ratio of sports available.
Correct. And so the devil really is in the details on that. And candidly, when you look at Title IX litigation, oftentimes whether the institution is meeting that substantially proportionate requirement is one of the key issues that's often litigated. So the question is, if we have a 55% female student body, but 44% of our athletes are female, is that substantially proportionate? And the courts might weigh yes or no, but that is the threshold issue that the court will often have to address, is how is that being accounted for, and how is substantially proportionate defined?
So is interest, I'm sorry, Lisa.
No, that's actually where I was going to go to. Do schools have to look at what, say, a female is interested in versus a male? Like, if you have a football team for men, do you have to have a football team for women?
So yes and no. The sport-specific opportunities are not as clear-cut. But let's go through all 3 tests before we jump in.
Fair enough.
Because interest is a key threshold, but it's in the third way you can satisfy the Title IX test. So the first one is the substantially proportionate test, and that test is, again, what does substantially proportionate mean? I don't know. The court's going to figure it out, or OCR is going to figure it out, and you just
numbers.
It's numbers. You've got to figure it out, though. You need to work with your legal counsel. If you're going to cut funding or you're going to cut programs, that's a consideration you need to be aware of.
Okay.
Second test that you can satisfy as an institution is where the members of one sex have been and are underrepresented among intercollegiate athletes, whether the institution can show a history and a continuing practice of program expansion, which is demonstrably responsive to developing interests and abilities of the members of that sex.
So like we're growing, we're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there. And so what you're trying to account for is, let's say you used to be an all-male school, you've recently merged and you've got a female school alongside, and you're together now. You're showing that, okay, we had X number of male participants and Y number of female participants. We're merging towards this responsive allocation of resources and individuals and interests.
So recognizing that overnight schools aren't going to be able to just put together and say, if we need 5 more female teams tomorrow, we'll support them.
Correct. So yes, it's a process. Now the challenge in 2019 is it's been a process since 1972, and if you're not up with that process, you might want to look at another test to try and satisfy, because that is a real issue. Now the interest piece gets really interesting, because there are sports, so football is kind of the big example, where you've got a team of 60 guys or men, and certainly it can be open to females to participate on the team, but it's predominantly a male sport, and so you need to have a corresponding female sport that provides for a similar number of roster spots.
So that might be a completely different sport.
Correct. So oftentimes you'll see a football paired with another volume-based team, and those can, on some level, balance themselves out. And then you've got a funding issue you've got to consider as well, because some sports are more expensive than others.
So it doesn't have to be exactly equal. It just has to be kind of equivalent.
Correct.
Like football to volleyball, right?
Oh, really? Is that a good
Well,
example?
I don't know.
Well, football, so yes and no. You're going to have a lot more football players
Team
than volleyball
members.
players. So it's got to be football, volleyball plus something else.
Okay.
And that's kind of and then I don't want to get into the devil or the nuance too much, because it is an institution-specific decision you have to make.
Okay.
But there's also seasonal considerations, facility considerations, and other accommodations for scheduling and things like that need to
Okay.
be accounted for.
So is there another test that works better for schools?
It could work better depending on the school. The third test is where the members of one sex are underrepresented. When you have members of one sex underrepresented among intercollegiate athletes in the institution, cannot show a history and continuing practice of program and expansion, whether that can be demonstrated that the interests and abilities of the member in that sex have been fully and effectively accommodated by the present programs. So
In other words, everybody's happy with what we have. Is that
exactly, yeah.
okay.
And so again, the threshold question is, there's a term, the term of art. So like substantially proportioned in the other test, here we've got fully and effectively accommodated.
Okay.
How do you fully and effectively accommodate the interests of both sexes?
Okay.
And that challenge is something that you've got to work with legal counsel on to undertake and determine whether you're being consistent with what your student population's interests and abilities are.
I think I read somewhere, I don't know if this is still the case, but I think at some point historically, schools were allowed to use that prong just by doing a survey. So like you give out a survey and then everybody says, yep, we're good, everything's good, and then you're kind of done. But I'm not sure if that's still...
So the surveys was a way that you could account for and determine whether you were fully and effectively accommodating the interests and abilities of both sexes.
So what, from a practical standpoint, does this look like if OCR is investigating a district or a university? They're not just going to be in compliance because they have a female team and a male team. They need to apply funding and look at other benefits for their analysis, correct?
Correct. So you're right on. So the OCR is going to look at whether the institution, the school, is providing equivalent, not identical, athletic participation opportunities and athletic benefits and treatment. So in the athletic participation opportunities context, the school's got to provide equal athletic participation opportunities for both sexes and must effectively accommodate the students' athletic interests. That determination by OCR, as well as the selection of sports offers and the levels of competition available, are certainly going to be things that are going to be considered. You see a lot of litigation, and it's not directly related to the OCR decision, but it is related to the Title IX world, where you're talking about is the provision of a club team the equivalent of a varsity sport, or the demotion between the two, or if the softball team practices on a field that's 10 minutes off campus compared to the baseball team that's practicing next to the track field, which is right next to the locker rooms, which is attached to the school.
Right.
Those types of opportunities are really going to be something that is considered. Then separately, and they run together, but the other is benefits and treatment. And there's 10 different components OCR does look at to determine if a school is complying with providing athletic benefits and treatments. They're looking at the selection of sports and competition levels and making sure they effectively accommodate the interests and abilities of both sexes.
Okay.
They're looking at the equipment and supplies provided. Your baseball team can't have new jerseys every 3 days while the softball team's wearing, the rags from Goodwill.
Okay.
They're looking at the game scheduling and practice time. Oftentimes, like in basketball, for example, you're dealing with a situation where oftentimes there's one court that all the school practices on. To give priority scheduling to the men's team all the time, or to give priority scheduling to the women's team all the time immediately after school, and requiring the other team to wait around for 2.5, 3 hours is not something it's not equal treatment.
Okay.
Travel and per diem allowances are considered. coaching and academic tutoring opportunities are considered. Compensation and assignment for coaches and tutors. So if your men's team is, got 6 tutors on staff designed to make sure that everyone's passing grades, and the females team doesn't have that, you look at the same problem.
It kind of sounds like just all these factors are things that make it easier for women to participate on sports teams versus things that might make it less desirable for.
I think, and there's a historical background to that that's really kind of informing all of this. And so the idea is that, what came first, the chicken or the eggs? So the argument's always been from proponents of, we'll say, less equal treatment, has been that, well, men are more interested than women in sports. And the corresponding rebuttal to that is, well, perhaps they're more interested in sports because the men get the better facility, they get the preferred time, they get the nice, locker room, gym, whatever the case might be.
And have been more readily available historically.
That makes sense.
Too.
Correct. So nobody wants to go play on a baseball field that's filled with rocks. Nobody wants to play on a softball field that's filled with rocks either. And so the regs are designed to ensure that, to the extent that used to be the way things were when Title IX was first passed in 1972, if you're still dealing with that problem, you need to address it, because if not, you're not treating everybody equally, and that's where their problems arise.
Okay.
So are there any key takeaways from the court cases that are out there that our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, so yes. I mean, without getting too much into the details, there is a seminal case generally that stands for the proposition that, well, there's 2 of them, but they both articulate the proposition that not only do these benefits apply in the higher education context, but they also apply at the K through 12 level. So what you need to be aware of is, you as a school board are subject to Title IX's athletic requirements. You as a school board are subject to ensuring that your athletics department is scheduling games in a manner that's consistent with the dictates of Title IX.
Okay.
There are a number of other cases, generally big picture, without giving you principles, without giving you specifics. One of the disputes often arise in a different context. We're talking about funding cases. We're talking about issues of how much funding and what happens when an institution is eliminating or expanding programs. So a lot of times what happens is, as an athletics department, you're looking at your budget and you're saying, okay, Title IX requires me to have a substantially proportionate number of men's and women's sports. When you're looking at that, as a practical matter, oftentimes the choice is, to get to that substantially proportionate level, you either have to cut some men's programs or increase the number of female programs you have.
Okay.
But from a practical standpoint, you run into a real problem there, because there might not be enough money to pay for the expansion of your female or women's sports programs.
While keeping all your male ones.
Exactly. So what happens is, you'll run into a situation where the institution makes the decision, we're going to cut these sports programs. And sometimes, depending upon the case and depending on the administration's decisions, they make a wholesale cut of the men's programs, or they do a blended, we're going to cut men's wrestling, men's swimming, and one other men's sport, and we're going to cut one women's sport as well, to get the numbers as close as they can. And so oftentimes you'll see an injunction, an action for injunctive release. Basically, someone runs to court and says, wait, stop. We need to preserve the status quo while we resolve this issue. And so a lot of the litigation, though it's not common, but the reported decisions, the sexy cases, often are those types of cases where you're dealing with the potential elimination of a sports team or a sports program. That harm is something that is irreparable in the eyes of a lot of courts. You can't replace the opportunity to participate in your sports team your senior year, or whatever the case may be. So courts are generally sympathetic to placing an injunction on those types of hearings or those types of decisions while the matter gets sussed out with the courts.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be pretty controversial.
They can be very controversial, and budgetary decisions among any athletics department can be really controversial, both because the benefit that athletics can provide and the opportunity for scholarships down the road that people view as a way to pay for higher education. So there is a high level of
public feeling, public emotion.
People get fired up over this stuff. They really do.
Well, and certainly the taking away of something that was already there in and of itself sounds more
Upsets people, yeah,
controversial
probably
than
upsets
adding
it breeds a lot of animosity, and those decisions, again, those decisions are ripe with both legal and practical decisions. Yeah. And you need to, as a district or as an institution, consult with your legal counsel about how best to navigate those waters, because it's not an easy decision, and any decision you make, someone's going to be mad about.
Yeah, it's not just going to be legal. There's certainly like PR issues and community issues that are going to come into play too. Mm-hmm. So before we wrap up on this topic, I think it's important that we also touch on extracurriculars and maybe the structure of available school classes, because those kind of tie into what's available for students to participate in through their educational experience. Miriam, I know you've advised and looked into this area a little bit. Do you want to dive into that?
I think this is an area, single-sex classrooms at the elementary and secondary level in school districts. This is, I think, an area where not a lot of school districts are aware of the OCR guidance on this topic. You know, sometimes I'll look at a school website and it'll say, oh, you know, girls book club meeting at lunch, or fourth grade boys academic challenge after school, and sometimes I think I'm not sure if the school district is aware that the Office for Civil Rights did issue guidance on single-sex activities, and this applies even to not only to extracurricular activities, but also to anything really in education, including a field trip. If you are, you know, taking all the girls in a certain grade, all the middle school girls on a field trip at the end of the year, or only the boys on a special field trip for boys, this is something that your school district should be aware of.
So are there any specific guidance that OCR has given for when a district is allowed to whether segregate or allow for one gender to participate in something and not have something available for the other gender?
So categorically, sex-segregated classes that are separated by sex, are permitted for contact sports and for human sexuality courses. And they are categorically prohibited for any vocational classes. So there is no scenario, according to the Office for Civil Rights, under which you can provide a vocational class only to one sex.
So if you have, say, a vocational class for like high school students to become mechanics, you can't just have that only open to the male students. Female students need to be able to participate that as well.
Right. As for other classes, everything that's not vocational or contact sports or human sexuality, you are allowed to offer this class to one sex only, either to males or females, but it must be justified. You have to go through a process of justifying this.
So what helps justify that scenario?
Yeah, so there's a two-part justification test. Each single-sex class has to be based on the school's important objective to improve students' educational achievements through diverse educational opportunities, or to meet the needs of a particular student. So it can't just be something that you want to do because it sounds good, or you have to identify either some kind of diversity or some type of needs. So and in addition, the single-sex nature of the class must be substantially related to achieving that objective. So, for example, a typical example that the Office for Civil Rights will give is, let's say you're having you wanted to teach the adolescents in your high school about violence in dating violence, and you wanted to offer a separate class to females on that topic because you think that females will be more open, or will because let's say there's a specific problem in your area with dating violence, so you wanted to have a session or several sessions with the guidance counselor and a group of high school girls. That is something that you can justify, but you have to document this before you offer the class. It can't just be after the fact, oh, here's why we separated everybody.
So here is what we're specifically targeting,
on.
and here's how the class is going to help us meet that objective.
Yeah, and of course, these are just keep in mind, these are very general, broad strokes, and each of these prongs that we're mentioning now, very briefly for this podcast, each one has various details and time frames associated with it. So. As always, if you have questions, it's always a good idea to talk to your attorneys and to give them a heads up before you plan a single-sex classroom. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, guys.
In our next and last episode in Title IX, we will talk about transgender, another area that is interesting and controversial. In the meantime, please subscribe to our podcast. Give us high ratings, and have a great day.